Hi everyone, today we will be embroidering these beautiful wildflowers onto blankets, sweaters, and cardigans. This is based off of a template I sell on my Etsy, so go ahead and check the description box down below if you haven't seen it yet, so you can go ahead and download all these beautiful wildflower templates I'm showing here. As always, I'm so excited to get started, and if you have any questions, please write them down below. I try to be quick to respond to them. We're going to go ahead and get started on our blanket placement. If you haven't printed out your stickers yet, pause the video now and go do that. All the information is down below on how to do that. But I'm going to start by just kind of flattening out my blanket. I do have it doubled up here, but I'm just going to be working on this smaller end. So this is a 30-inch by 40-inch blanket. Again, it will be in the description box below. And I'm going to be working on this smaller side, which is about 30 inches, which will take about 8 to 12 flowers to fill up. So I went ahead and printed off 3 of my favorite flowers from my kit. And we're going to go ahead and work with these. So I just went ahead and cut all of these out. You can just do a rough cut here. It really doesn't have to be perfect. Try to get close to the flowers though, so you can see kind of the blank space that will be on the blanket once you kind of place these down. And then I'm just going to go ahead here and just start kind of placing flowers on the blanket. Again, this is a wildflower blanket. It's not supposed to be perfect, so just go ahead and have fun with it. I like to try to mix and match the different flowers and whatnot, but you can go ahead and just do all the same lavender or all the same daisies, you know, it's really supposed to be fun. I do have 2 other flowers on this guide if you want to add those in too, but I'm just working on my viral blanket here that everybody seems to love, which is these 3 famous flower patterns I have here. So again, I'm kind of just finagling them here how I like them. This will take a while, and this is sped up like 4x, so just be patient and just make sure you really get that placement right. As you can see, I didn't use 3 flowers, and that's totally fine. So once I'm happy with my placement, I like to start in the middle of my blanket and kind of work my way outwards. That way I don't get stuck with kind of like an empty spot on the end to work with. So as you see here, you can kind of just peel off the stickers and place them. I like to make sure my stems line up with that bottom. I don't like to embroider on that kind of bottom border. I just like to make sure my stems kind of start from that border. So we're gonna go ahead and speed this up now and just get all of these placed. You can go ahead and skip to the next step if you like, but I like to just show all of these getting placed. Next, I'm going to quickly run through how to place our quick print guide on our sweater here. So our quick print is a selection of 5 flowers that are already kind of placed for you, so you don't have to do any of the work. I like to kind of flatten out my sweater because, as you can see, they kind of tend to curve. So I try to make that line flat on the bottom and straight. That way it lines up with our straight florals here. Again, this is kind of a wildflower loosey-goosey kind of template, so it really doesn't have to be placed with any precision. The only thing I like to do when I'm doing this is make sure my stems align to the bottom border of that sweater. I like to kind of start my stems from that border going upwards, so I like to make sure all of my stems are either touching or overlapping that border just so I can start from there. And lastly, I'm going to show you how you would stick a single floral on a cardigan. Here I've printed out my Aster flower that we're going to stitch on this beautiful chunky cardigan. I kind of just like to line these up on the bottom, again with that border, but you could also do an initial in the top right corner. I've seen those before and they're very beautiful. But again, just to do a simple flower, you can just pick any of our prints and print them out. We're just going to do the same steps where we peel off that flower and stick it down. Again, I like to kind of make sure I'm touching that border so that my stem, it looks like it's coming out of that border of the sweater. So again, place it down nice and flat so it's secure, and then we can go ahead and get started. This last step I really love to do is to kind of work with all of my colors and to get the placement down before I start stitching. So I have all of my beautiful colors laid out. My stem and my center color though, I'm going to take away and just work with these 5 colors I plan to use for the florals. I really love these colors. I'll have them all listed down in the description box below if you want to use these. But now I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'm going to use a Crayola washable marker and kind of just like label my flowers for each color I'm going to do. I find if I don't do this that I end up with like 2 oranges next to each other or 2 pinks really far apart and it just looks funky. So I just like to do this additional step just so I'm not cursing myself down the road, but it's totally optional. Okay, we're going to start our first stitch, which is a lazy daisy stitch. We're going to be using this beautiful mauve color from Yarn Bee. It's the Soft and Sleek brand, but again, I'll have these all listed down below. We're going to thread our needle, and if you've never threaded a needle before for our yarn embroidery, just make sure that you leave this tail on the end. I like to leave about 4 to 6 inches. That way the needle just doesn't pop off while you're stitching. If it does, you can just rethread it, but I like to save myself a little bit of a headache. We're going to start on the back of the blanket, bringing our needle up through that center of our lazy daisy. It might be a little hard to pull through at first, but I find holding my thumb in the middle, right where the needle's coming up, really helps keep that tension. And again, same on the back, we're going to keep a tail. We'll use this to tie off with later. To do our first stitch, we're going to go down in the same exact hole we just created, but then come back up through that first dot of our first petal. You'll notice that my yarn is behind my needle, and that's exactly what I want. That way when I pull it through, I'm creating a loop. Once you get a little bit of resistance, stop. You do not want to over tighten or you'll get some puckering. We're going to stitch down our flower by putting our needle back down through that same hole we just created and pulling tight. This one you can pull a little bit more tight just to make sure it's secure. We're going to continue this process just going down and up through that first petal stitch, keeping the yarn behind our needle and pulling through, making sure to stop once we feel a little bit of resistance. Feel free to stop and go back if this process isn't making sense for you, because we're going to be using this stitch very frequently for the rest of the flowers, so I want to make sure you master this stitch first, because it's going to be one of our main stitches we do for this entire process. You'll see here I'm just finishing off my last petal, and I'm going to stitch it and pull through the back, and you'll notice I'm finishing off on the back now, and I have 2 strands of yarn. I want to make sure my flower looks good on the front, and it does, so we can go ahead and tie off these 2 strands of yarn now. You'll notice I kind of differentiate which directions I use for my knots when I'm tying my triple knot. That just kind of helps keep it more secure, but I just tie a triple knot on the back and then cut off the excess, leaving a little bit just to prevent it from kind of falling off. Next, we're going to do the centers of our flowers, and I lost the footage, so we're going to be working on our orange flowers here. You're going to take your center color yarn and come up through the center of the flower. It might be a little hard to pull through, but just kind of wiggle it around. Again, keep that tail in the back just like with everything we do. And we're doing a modified French knot here, so I'm actually just going to tie 2 knots in my yarn. I again like to kind of differentiate the direction I went. So the first one I went this way, so now I'm going to go the opposite direction. I find this just kind of helps make that knot more spherical. And I now have my 2 knots, so we can go back down. I like to try to aim for a different spot. Don't go through the same hole you just created when you came up. Otherwise, you might just pull your knot entirely through the blanket, and that's not what we want. Once we're happy with that, we can again do that triple knot on the back to secure this. And I like to make sure I pull really, really tight with these so it's nice and extra secure. But again, you see me kind of differentiating the directions I do. That just again helps make it very secure. Snip off the excess and you are done. Next, we will be working on our wildflower stitch, which is again a modified lazy daisy stitch. You'll see here I've done one in this beautiful champagne color. So again, I've threaded my needle with this beautiful light pink champagne color. We're going to go ahead and get started on the bottom petal of one of our flowers. So I'm going to go through that first dot on the bottom of our flower. And again, just like every stitch we've done in the past, pull it through, but leave about 4 to 6 inches of tail on the back. Again, just like our lazy daisy, go down and come up through that first dot, pulling it through, and stop when you feel resistance, and then stitch it down. Again, this is very similar to our lazy daisy, but in this case, we're just going to be doing 3 stitches, all coming out of that same exact dot on the bottom of our flower until we've finished off all of our petals. I'm just going to speed it up here just because you've already done this stitch before, but I still want you to see kind of what it looks like as I go through and do each of the stitches here. Just because they are a little closer together, you want to make sure they look nice and even and well defined. On the back here, again, we're going to have 2 pieces of yarn, and we're just going to go ahead and tie those off again with a triple knot, just like everything we've done here. And again, if you haven't seen me kind of differentiating those directions, I kind of go right over left, and then you'll notice left over right. It's kind of like a square knot, but it just provides a little bit more security when you're doing that triple knot so that these don't come off, especially when little fingers are playing with them and trying to poke and prod at them. So there you go, there's your wildflower. This is actually my favorite stitch, the lavender. It is again a modified lazy daisy stitch, but you're going to be doing a lot of petals. So I don't have these starting dots here, so kind of just aim for that beginning center line of your lavender and then come up through the back just like we have been doing, leaving that tail in the back to tie off with later. I like to start on the top petal and work my way through clockwise just because I am a righty, but if you're a lefty, it might make sense to work your way counterclockwise. It doesn't matter which petal you start on, just make sure you go in a circular direction. That way your yarn will line up at the end to tie off with, and you're not stuck with yarn that's kind of separated. So again, here we're doing very similar stitches to the lazy daisy stitch. The only difference here with the lavender is you're going to be moving where you start your petal each time. So these blankets, you're going to have a lot of fabric to work with, but you'll see here I kind of go below that to start my next petal. You will get a little bit of kind of gappage on these flowers, but I think it looks really cute that way. You'll see here that there's kind of some gapping going on. But that's kind of how I like these to look. It looks very natural and elegant and kind of like the petals are floating. You'll also notice here I went all the way down on the right side and now I'm starting back on the left side going upwards. Again, that's just so my yarn meets at the top so I can tie it off with. And there we have it. We're going to be doing our last petal here, and then you'll notice when I stitch this down, our yarn will be at the top. So we don't have to do any weaving or finagling to get those yarn strands to meet on the back side. That's exactly what you want. You'll notice here my yarns are close together. I do have a little bit of gapping there on the bottom, but this is for my niece, so I hope she doesn't mind that too bad. If this was for a customer, I would definitely fix it, but I think she'll be okay with this. There you have it. You just stitched your lavender. How pretty. Next, we're going to be working on our Aster stitch, which I think looks like a real daisy, but the Lazy Daisy stitch is a well-known stitch, so I couldn't rename it. We're going to start by taking our yellow yarn, which is our center color for our Aster, and we're going to be doing a small chain stitch circle on that yellow portion of our flower. I'm going to come up through the back of the sweater, and again, leave that tail in the back to tie off with later. We're going to be doing very tiny chain stitches, which just means we're going to go down through that same hole and come up about 1/8 of an inch away, making sure to catch that loop when you pull through. We're going to keep doing this process, going down through that same hole we just created inside that first chain stitch loop and come up, pulling it through, grabbing that loop. Since this is a very tight and tiny space to work with, the tiniest stitches are going to be your best friends here, and just keep pulling those through and turning the sweater. That way you get about 6, maybe 5 chain stitches done in this tiny little circle. We're just going to keep doing this until we get right back to the center here. Then I'm going to do this technique where I go through that first set of chain stitch yarns. As you see here, I'm using the eye of the needle. I just find it a little easier. Then I'm going to pull this through. This is called a reverse chain stitch, but I like to do this just to finish off the flower, and then push your needle down through that same exact hole of the last chain stitch you just created. That way when you pull through, you get this perfect little center. I have a little bit of a gap in the middle there, so I'm just going to fill it in with just a simple satin stitch here, which just means you come up and go down just to kind of fill it in with a line of yarn. Once you're happy with how that looks, I'm very happy with how that looks, it's nice and filled in with no gaps, we can go ahead and flip our sweater over, and again, just like we have been doing, we are going to tie a triple knot on the back and cut off the excess. Again, here you'll notice I kind of alternate going left over right and then right over left. This just keeps it a little more secure for little ones. I notice my daughter really likes to play with these and kind of try to pick at it, so any way I can make this more secure, I will. So you'll probably notice a theme by now, and this flower is the same. We're going to leave the tail here so our needle doesn't pop off, and we're just going to be doing those petals exactly as we have the lazy stitch, the lazy daisy stitch, the wildflower stitch. All of them are going to be the same. In this case, we just kind of have 4 in a row here. I'm just going to show you one stitch, but this is going to be identical to these other stitches you've learned. The only issue here is you're trying to kind of avoid that yellow center, but you'll see here even I pull up a little bit of that center. You can kind of pull it out in the back if you want, but I just went ahead and kept embroidering because it will be fine. You won't even notice at the end. So I'm just going to do one lazy daisy stitch here, but in this case you would just continue the petals all the way until you filled out all 4 petals of your stitch, tie it off with a triple knot in the back, and then you're done and you've learned your Aster. I hope this helps. Let's get started on our next flower. Okay, the rose stitch is one of my all-time favorites to do. This is called the woven wheel stitch. I'm going to thread up about 6 feet of my lilac yarn here. And starting on the back, I'm going to come up through the middle of where all those spokes meet. Again, just like all our other flowers, keep that tail in the back to tie off with later. We're going to go down and then come up through 2 of the outside dots of our rose here. You'll notice it's a circle, but it'll look like a rose when we're done. And now we can do this technique where we go down through the center and up through an outside dot. We're basically just creating a 5-point spoke, and we're just going to keep doing that all the way around until we get to the end. And then I do this little technique here where I go down through the center and up through the other side. I got caught on my doorknob, but that way we can pull it off and then we can start actually weaving it. So I'm going to go down underneath one of the spokes, over the next spoke, and then down underneath that third spoke. So every other spoke you're going to go underneath. That way on each alternating row, you're going to have one over and one under. So if you did under on the last spoke, you're going to go over this time. Keep doing this all the way around until you've covered up all of the spokes of your rows. I'm going to go ahead and kind of just go inward towards my flower just so you can't see where I kind of stopped my stitching. And I'm happy with that. It's kind of hidden under the rows, and that's exactly what we want. It might be a little hard to pull this through, but just go ahead and pull taut using your thumb as stabilizer in the middle there. And there you have it, a beautiful, beautiful rose. Again, just like all of our other flowers, we're going to turn it to the back and we're going to tie that triple knot going left over right, right over left accordingly until you get that beautiful triple knot. Here it's going to be a little delicate. Don't pull too tight on the first one. You'll see I kind of pulled tighter on the second and third ones. That way you don't kind of pull in the yarn from the front or it'll look a little wonky. But there you have it. You just did a rose. How cute is that? I love this stitch so much. Now we can go ahead and get started on our stems. This is going to be the most beginner-friendly stitch that I show on this process, and I'm going to thread up my green yarn. And as you can see here, I use this little guide on my nail here. You can also use a piece of tape. I'll show you that in the next step, but I really like this nail guide. Just with a Sharpie, I put it on my nail, and it's about 1/4 of an inch. We're going to come up with our green stem color at the base of our stem. Again, I like to make sure I'm really, really close to that border of the blanket, just so it kind of looks very cohesive when I'm doing these stems. I'm going to pull that all the way through, leaving a tail to tie off with later. And now we can use that stitch guide on our thumb to make sure we have really even stitches. So I'm kind of lining up my stitches and then I can go down. Now I know I'm exactly 1/4 of an inch away. I'm going to pull this through, making sure I don't pull too tight or I'll just keep pulling the yarn through because it isn't secured with anything. Again, I'm going to use that stitch guide now and I'm going to come up through the back of the garment, and this is where we actually start our backstitch. So I'm going to pull that all the way through. Again, try not to pull too tight. Once you feel resistance, stop. And then the backstitch just means we go down through that same hole we just created, and in one fluid motion I'm going to come back up again 1/4 inch away from our last stitch. This just saves me time from having to go down and come back up in 2 motions. And if you're doing a lot of embroidery, this will save you over half the time in the long run to just go down and come back up in your next spot. You'll notice I kind of pulled too tight, so I just stretch out the blanket there to kind of get it back to normal. But we're just going to keep doing this process, going back down through the same hole and then creating a new hole 1/4 inch away from our previous yarn stitch. This is a typical back stitch, and it is one of the most common stitches to use. I really like it for the stem because it leaves just a very clean, even line for your stitch work. But we're going to go all the way up to the base of the flower, like you see here, and then we can just finish off our back stitch with one last stitch going down. You'll notice though that we kind of skipped the flower part or the leaf part of our stem. So now we have to weave our needle back through on the back to get to the base of that stem. I like to do this so that you don't have kind of a gap in your yarn on the back that little fingers could get caught in. So you'll notice here I'm kind of just weaving my needle back through until I get to the base of that first stem leaf, so I can start it here. Once I get to the base, I can start it, and it's going to be identical to the lazy daisy stitch. So we're going to pull it all the way through. You'll notice I get something caught here. Always try to make sure you're looking at the back so you're not getting loops and weird things going on. But then we can just do a simple lazy daisy for our stem leaf, making sure the yarn is behind the needle, pulling it through, making sure you grab that loop, and then stitching down that little loop you have there just to create a cute little leaf. We're going to continue this process where we kind of weave the yarn back to the base here. So I'm going to go down all the way back until I get to that original piece of yarn. Might be a little hard to see here, but I kind of just push my needle all the way through. It got caught a little bit, so just wiggle it through until it gets back. And then pull that all the way through. Don't pull too tight or you will risk over tightening your stem. And then once I'm at the bottom again, we're going to start the same exact process going up the other stem. So if you have additional branches of your stems, this is exactly the process you're going to do, where you go all the way back down to that first yarn piece and then work your way up the next stem. So I'm going to go all the way up and then dog hair. We're going to go all the way up to the base of the flower, then navigate our way back so we can do these little individual leaves, and then navigate all the way back down to that first original yarn piece. So as you can see here, I finished off all my leaves. So I'm just navigating back to my beginning yarn strand. That way it looks really clean on the back, and I can tie off a knot here and no one will even be the wiser of what happened on the back of our blanket today. So I'm going to tie a triple knot. Again, everything should be very clean on the back. There shouldn't be any large gaps or loops in your yarn. If there are, I would honestly start over just because I don't want little fingers to get caught in them. But there you go. You just completed a back stitch for your stem. How cute. Okay, this is an intermediate stitch for our stems. It's called the split stitch. I really love the look of this. It kind of looks like a chain stitch, but a lot thinner. I try to go for thinner stitches for my stems just so they look very elegant and dainty. That's why I don't do a chain stitch. But again, we're just going to start off this process at the base of our stem, pulling through, leaving a tail to tie off with later. And we're going to go down about 1/4 inch away and then come up again another 1/4 inch away. Again, very similar to the back stitch here, but you'll notice when I pull through that we're going to do a new technique when we come back down. So now when we come back down, we're going to go down through that first yarn stitch. This is going to be really hard here, but make sure you kind of like stab that yarn in the middle. That's kind of what the meaning of split stitch is, and then come up 1/4 inch away. That way when we pull it through, it kind of again looks like a split stitch. You'll see what it means here. It's very hard to see where it started and ended, but again, go down through that yarn right in the middle. You really want to aim for the middle here so that it looks really cohesive when you get to the end of the split stitch. Pull that through again, making sure not to over tighten. You're going to continue this process going down through the middle of the yarn you just created. So I'm going to show you one more time where I go down through that yarn. It's very hard to see here because the garment kind of like moves on me, but go down through that yarn, come up 1/4 inch away from where your last yarn came out. That way you're creating this split stitch technique. Again, similar to our back stitch stem, we're just going to navigate on the back to get those leaves done, and we're going to do the same technique for these leaves, but I'm just going to pull that through. But you'll notice here that the stem stitch is very elegant, very dainty, and you can't even tell where these stitches start and end. I like this a little bit more than the back stitch just because it looks more like a stem and there's no kind of like, you know, jagged starts and stops. Again, though, I'm just going to navigate back to the beginning yarn just so I can tie off with. This just prevents any loops from forming that little fingers could get caught in, and it just makes your work look really, really clean on the back. So again, this is the stem stitch we did here. The split stitch, sorry, this is the split stitch we did here. And we're just going to tie this off with a triple knot, just like we have been doing with everything in this video. So just tie that off and cut off the excess just like we have been doing. Again, I like to make sure that last third knot is really, really tight and leave about 1/4 inch of excess. But there you have it, the split stitch. It's very, very pretty. I love this stitch. It's super cute for flowers. Okay, last but certainly not least, the stem stitch. This is my absolute favorite stitch, but it is very, very difficult to learn. So we're going to take this very slow, and I'm going to try to explain the process really well here. But I absolutely love this stitch for flowers. It looks so cool because it kind of gives like a whipped back stitch effect where it's very spirally. We're going to start this off just like we did all of our other stems, coming up through the base of that stem, leaving a tail on the back to tie off with later. And we're going to start by coming up about 1/4 inch away, and again go down and up another 1/4 inch away. That way we're about 1/2 inch away from where we first started. Again, very similar to how we've started all of our other stitches. We can pull this through, stopping once you feel resistance. Now, to make this the stem stitch, I am going to use a little bit of a piece of tape here just to get that 1/4 inch placing. Again, though, I kind of like the Sharpie technique earlier, but if you don't want to ruin your nails, we're going to actually come in under our piece of yarn here, halfway through it. It will make more sense once we go up the stitch, but we're then going to come up 1/4 inch away from where our last yarn stopped. It will make more sense here once we pull it through and start on our second stitch. This first one's just really hard because it's not a lot of space to work with. But once you come through, now we can actually go down through that same hole of our first 1/4 inch yarn stitch. You'll see here I'm going through the same exact hole and now coming up 1/4 of an inch away from where our yarn last came up. Again, I'm trying to use this piece of tape as a good guide, but it's just not working for me. I prefer the Sharpie technique, but I thought I'd show you guys both techniques here. So again, we're going to go down through that hole we just created. So notice it's 2 holes down on our stem, and always go to the right or always go to the left of your yarn. That way you're creating that spiral effect. So you'll start to notice the spiral take shape here where it's kind of spiraling towards one side, but it's really not. So again, going through that last hole and then up 1/4 of an inch away from where our yarn just came out. Again, this is a very hard stitch for me to learn, but I love how elegant and pretty it looks. We're going to continue that process all the way up to the base of our flower. When I do this one, I like to just end it here and just go down here on my last stitch. I'm not going to come up again and do another stem stitch, but you totally can. But I like the look of just one very light, dainty stem, if that makes sense, instead of kind of doubling it up and doing it twice. Again, we're going to do that same technique on the back where we navigate to our leaf, do the leaf stitch, and then again navigate back to our next portion of flower. So you'll notice here I have a lot of branches of the stem to do. So I'm going to navigate down to this last flower, stitch that, and then I'll keep navigating using this technique on the back. That way, again, we're not creating any loops or anything where fingers can get caught, and it makes our work like very clean on the back. As you see here, I've now navigated to that bottom flower, so I can show you kind of how to stitch these in. Since this is such a tight little space here, I'm just going to do 1 stitch here. You won't even notice, it doesn't look like a stem stitch. You're just going to come up and kind of do 1 stitch into the stem. You just want to make sure they all connect. So I just kind of made sure it goes under that stem. That way it connects. You don't want any gaps here, otherwise it won't look like your flower is actually connected to each other and it'll look funny. But yeah, I think that looks good for the smaller flower. We're going to navigate down to the bottom so that we can start our next branch of our stem, just so I can show you how to connect the stem stitch leaf. Now, when you're starting another branch to your stem, it might be really hard, especially if you have, you know, these little leaves and everything in the way. So I'm just going to go down kind of through the yarn and start the same stem stitch that we did on the first branch. Again, it really doesn't matter as long as these stems are connected. And again, here I'm just going to go in kind of the middle of the stem. That way it's all connected and it looks cohesive. If it's too small to do a stem stitch, a simple stitch here, like I just showed you, works totally fine. We're going to navigate again to our beginning piece of yarn. That way we can tie it off. If you run out of yarn halfway through any of these processes, feel free to just kind of navigate back to that beginning yarn, tie it off, and then you can start a totally fresh piece of yarn. That is totally fine. I like to kind of make sure I'm using about 6 to 8 feet of yarn though, so I don't have to do that for each stem. But it's totally fine if you have to tie off and restart. But there you have it. You just completed your stem stitch. I went through and did a variety of stem stitches for all of my flowers just so it looks a little different, a little more wildflower-like, but there you have it. If you wanted to put a name, I like to put my names up here about 3 to 4 inches above the flowers, but I'm just going to do a leaf blanket here for my niece, so I'm done here. Now, to wash off the stabilizer, you can run it under the kitchen sink or your bathroom sink until it runs clean. I like to throw mine in the washer on a cold, delicate cycle. I find this gets it off the best, but if you don't have a washer, the sink will work just fine. Just make sure all those little pieces are off. I like to hang mine to dry. Right here I have it on a baby gate, but your shower rod would work just as well, or a curtain rod. And there you have it. Once it's dry, you are ready to enjoy your blanket. I have absolutely loved making these blankets. They are going viral all over my Instagram. So many of you guys wanted to do these, and I thank you for your patience as I got this template out. I absolutely love these blankets for babies, toddlers, even adults. They're so much fun and so cute and pretty. And if you did it correctly, your back should look very clean like mine here. I absolutely love these blankets as gifts. And of course, as you remember, our sweater is also complete here. So we have our sweater details here. Oh, I absolutely love these for newborn milestones and just for everyday wear. They're so cute. I just can't get over these. I love these templates. I hope you had fun making these with me. Don't forget those little singleton flowers we did on our cardigans. I love the way these turned out too. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below and make sure to like and follow me. It really helps boost my content so I can continue making more of these for you guys. Bye and happy crafting.